the slant that Wendy and I decided on is that we're not sure that we can think of black swans, because black swans are kind of predictions, and predictions are usually pretty lame and fall short of the mark. So what we're going to try to do is try to provoke us all into setting the stage for the ensuing discussion. So we're going to try to be a little provocative and get stuff out there that will serve as fodder for the conversation. Wendy?
All right, so when we start to think about internet privacy, this is such a massive area to think about. You could think about healthcare, and one of the areas I was looking at was this latest thing with 23andMe, and how this is that company where you handed in a swab, and they did like kind of DNA genetic analysis, you paid them, and then FDA came back and they said, you've got to not do this anymore, you're not passing the right tests for us. And now the big farms, the Genentech is paying $50 million to get their hands on that data. So very interesting, but we're not going down that path. There's also the European Union and the whole area of the right to be forgotten. So this is pretty fascinating. That hasn't come to the United States just yet, and it may never get to certain countries, but we're not going to that. But instead, we thought it would be appropriate to kind of turn our attentions more to the educational realm, and we're going to approach this not so much, well, you'll see how we're going to approach it, and we're going to approach it with scenarios. So I am going to do my piece with learning analytics, because this certainly hits a lot of us in the area of education. So let's imagine that we are at this Midwest state university where they are wanting to increase their enrollment and they want to build their reputation, but unfortunately the opposite is happening. Their enrollment is slipping, they don't know how to get their hands around it, so they decide that they're going to put together this task force, this retention task force. Some of you may even have some of these in your areas. And with this task force then is setting about to figure out what to do, and they come back with a recommendation that the best they can do is get this learning analytics system in place, because this way there'll be feedback to the students, and then the faculty can get the information, and in fact, reports can be given to the administrators. So everybody's going to know what's going on with the learning. So this seems like a pretty good plan. Well, now let's turn the stage a little bit to a particular professor. I think her name is Dr. Brewster or Brewer or something like that. That's her name. She teaches, she's an assistant professor. She teaches the fundamentals of biology, a fairly large class of 100 students. It's a pre-med requirement, and they are implementing the learning analytics system. So everything seems to be going just fine. And then of the 100 students at midterm, 20 of them come up at risk. This is a little bit of a panic, because remember, not only the students are told they're at risk, the faculty knows that they're coming up at risk, and in fact this information is going up to the chair. And of course then the chair is responsible for retention, and we've got this whole pattern of information going on. Well, the teacher now is in a quandary, because it's like she has some resources, she has some support staff, she has some materials, but she can only help 10 students. So this is the problem for her. She has to figure out what to do, who to choose, how to help the students, and keep her job. So let's say, for instance, Malcolm is one of the students, and he has come to talk with me. I'm now the professor.
And my position is, I got this note saying that I'm in trouble. What do you mean I'm in trouble? How did this information get forward? I don't need any help. I'm fine, thank you very much. And who gave anyone permission to look into my records, make this diagnosis, which I think is a superficial diagnosis? So, Professor, frankly, I'm really kind of pissed about this.
You know, I understand you have a problem. That you don't ever want to be labeled it as at risk. I know you participate, but in fact, this learning analytics system is letting us know that you need some help, and I think we can help you.
But I'm raising this bigger issue is that who gave permission to peer into my records in the first place? I think this is an invasion of my privacy. I'm a learner. I have a right to my own privacy. I have my own methods for doing things. Who gave anyone permission to pry into my affairs?
Well, you are a student here, and your information is available to us. We are looking to help make you successful. We need this information. This information, in fact, is helping the university become more successful.
It's true. So I'm going to break out of role here. I say that's exactly the conundrum here, though, is that we all take learning analytics for granted, but what about the privacy and security aspects around it as well?
And just to follow up, some of the questions that you may want to be asking is, as we gather the learning analytics, and there are some businesses now, not to mention any names, that are trying to come together to gather learning analytics across multiple universities and use this data to strengthen learning. But what does that mean? Obviously, this is a privacy issue. And then what happens with this information? Does it get sent to parents? Does it get sent to future employers? Those are questions that need to be raised, the positives and negatives. There are many positive and negatives here, but let's now turn our attention to freedom of expression.
All right, I'm going to present you with another scenario, and I hope you appreciate I orchestrated this very carefully, because in today's Chronicle of Higher Education, there's an article which is exactly on topic here. So here's the scenario. Professor Hammersmith teaches sociology at Football University. He wants his students to use U.S. Census data to complete an assignment. Now, I'm basing this on something that really happened. It's a movie, like to say in the movie, is based on true events. This is closely modeled on exactly true events. I'm following an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. But lo and behold, due to a rare bit of acrimony between the political parties in Washington, there is a government shutdown, and the websites that serve census data are not operational. In a fit of pique, at the end of a long day, Hammersmith sends a note to the students in the course using the LMS's closed email system. He cancels the assignment, stating that the assignment will be impossible to complete because of the Republican/Tea Party-controlled House of Representatives. But a student in his class, John Foxtrot, takes exception to this slight of the Republican Party and tweets that, quote, "My prof blames Republicans" in an email, or in this tweet, which nicely fits into the Twitter character limit. John has enough of a following on Twitter such that his tweet is picked up by conservative groups. So when Professor Hammersmith goes to open his inbox the next morning, it is a bit like a hurricane has torn through. The inbox is awash with vitriolic and nastygram emails, one going so far as saying, quote, "Quit your job because you're worthless, expletive deleted." Some of the angry emails were even CC'd to department's email account. And things snowball from there. A conservative radio talk host, whose program airs in several Wisconsin cities, posts a copy of Professor Hammersmith's government shutdown email on Facebook for her listeners. The university president begins getting notes from Republican legislators at the state and federal level. Noting nothing in the university's handbook had clearly barred Professor Hammersmith from sending his government shutdown email, and nothing in the student code barred John Foxtrot from distributing that email far and wide, and nothing in his policy spelled out an obvious response to all the furor around the professor's words. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Professor and President Shapiro, who is president of Football University. And the question for you, President Shapiro, is, what do you do with the professor? Do you ask the professor to apologize for partisan remarks, or you defend the professor for freedom of speech?
I have a real problem with this. My advisors, my president's counsel is telling me that I need to reprimand the professor. And yet, I am a big proponent of freedom of speech. I do know this is one of our outstanding professors, and I understand the frustration. So in fact, as you now become the professor, let me hear why you feel that you had a right to make this statement, and do you feel you should apologize?
Academic freedom entirely. Why should my academic freedom be a bridge just for political niceties? Higher education and academia thrives on freedom of speech and academic freedom of expression. Isn't that being in danger? Aren't we being, in a sense, being plagued by terrorist groups that would make us grow silent?
But what if this has an impact? Is it that difficult for you to make an apology? This is having a huge impact on our university.
Well, an apology might be the politic thing to do, but I think there's a larger issue here, and that's our right to expression, our freedom of expression. Our freedom's going to be curtailed because everything now is public and due to the lack of security.
Well, I am afraid to tell you that if you don't apologize, we're going to have to put you out into a sabbatical. We're not going to be able to keep you on.
So that's our scenario around this. I mean, so we're going to leave it as possible conversation fodder and material for the tables to sort this one out. Just one last thought on this is that another implication of this last scenario, I think, is that we've all had this assumption about the course as being kind of a place where what says in the course stays in the course. And the reason why I put that in the scenario that this professor used their LMS email because it's closed, thinking that it's secure, it's just between us as course participants. But obviously that professor had a rude awakening when the remarks were tweeted out and it became something that went viral across the internet. So this is, I think maybe I would just suggest one possible black swan here would be a day in which there's a nice balance, a perfect complementary fit between freedom and security on the internet. They tend to go back and forth, and sometimes we emphasize security at the cost of freedom and vice versa. The black swan would be we get to a nice balance point where those two competing agendas really do balance themselves out. Thank you.